Hello and welcome to Houdini Character Rigging 1, brought to you by 3dbuzz.com. My name is Steve Twist, I'm the Director of Houdini Education at 3dbuzz.com, and I'll be the lead instructor throughout this training product. Now, this is the first of two DVDs where we're going to look at setting up the controls for a character, and in this DVD we're going to be focusing on the controls that are on the left and right hand side of our character, so that's both of our arms and our legs as well. Now, before we discuss the controls, let's talk a little bit about the start file that you will find on the DVD. So I'm going to open up the start file. Now, the start file contains a number of nodes in a network to organize our geometry, and it's referencing that geometry that you also find in a Goblin BGOs folder on the DVD. It's referencing that geometry locally to the location of the start file. So do make sure when you copy the start file off the DVD onto your hard drive, you copy those geometry files and the folder with those geometry files in to the same location so that everything references correctly. Now, we're going to be setting up our rig for a Goblin character, but more than just setting it up for a Goblin character that we can see in front of us, we're also going to be setting it up for a skeleton. So let's discuss a little bit about these models and the differences between setting up a rig for each of them. So our first character is the Goblin character. He is modeled by Mr. Zach Parrish, and he's more of a cartoony type character. So we're going to give the animator the ability to stretch out his limbs if the animator indeed wishes to do that. But our skeleton character is more anatomically correct. This is a model created by my good friend Count Zero over at 3dbuzz, and this character cannot stretch, so we need to make sure that the animator has the ability to come in and lock the stretchiness if they wish to do so, so that when working with the skeleton, that stretchiness is locked. Whereas with working with the Goblin, they can have stretchiness if they wish, although they can turn off stretchiness if they want to work with the Goblin without having any stretch. So now let's go ahead, load up the final file that we'll have at the end of this DVD, and let's talk a little bit about the controls we'll be setting up. So we're going to set up the controls for our leg, then the controls for our arm, both on the left hand side of our character, and then we're going to mirror those over to the other side of our rig. So our leg controls are going to give us the ability to position our foot, and obviously our leg will come along as well, along with rotating and orienting the foot. We also have the ability to twist the knee. Notice that the twist does indeed occur, the rotation occurs from the correct pivot point, but our control object always sits out in front of the knee. We also have the ability to come in and roll the foot from the ball of the foot, or also to roll that foot from the toes as well if we wish to. So that's going to be our leg rig that we create. Our arms have a large amount of functionality. Let's start out by talking about the shoulder position controls. And you can see currently I do have stretchiness enabled on both of our arms, and also if I was to grab this control not on this leg, I believe on this leg I do have stretchiness enabled. So there we go. On this leg stretchiness is enabled. On this leg currently stretchiness is not enabled, but if I was to grab that upper leg, so let's hunt down our upper leg, we can come in and indeed enable stretchiness by blending from 0 to 1. So there's the stretchiness lock that we'll be creating on the legs. On the arms currently stretchiness is set to a value of 1, allowing us to have stretchiness there. So we've got the ability to position the shoulder. We also have FK controls for our arm, so we can position our arm using FK controls, or if we wish, if I hunt down our arm FK IK controls, we can blend over to IK, and you can see that with IK we will be working with an IK handle and our twist effector, and the twist is going to be another rotational base control, again with the pivot point in the correct location. Now, more than just that, we have the ability when stretchiness is enabled, and there's that arm stretch parameter that will disable stretchiness or enable it. When it is enabled for both IK and if we're working with FK, we have the ability to stretch out our upper arm and our lower arm manually, in addition to with IK, if we blend over to IK, having the arm stretch automatically when we reach the end of the bone chain. So we're actually going to have a number of different parameters for controlling the stretchiness of our arm, both when we're dealing with FK and when we're dealing with IK. We can also come in and we can say, because currently we're blended over to IK, let's say for whatever reason we want our FK to match that, so we can say match FK to IK, and now if we blend back and forth, there's a slight motion. Again, this will be discussed as to why this occurs. There is a small limitation with the way we set up our lower arm, but it's such a subtle motion that I'm really not worried about it. Again, that is discussed later on the DVD as to why there is that very, very slight difference, and there always will be, between our IK and our FK. We can also go in, and if I blend over to FK, we can grab our FK controls and let's orient these in a very interesting position. Let's say something down like here, with our arm up like so. And we can say, because currently they're obviously not matched, let's say match IK to FK. You'll see that they are matched, apart from that very small twist that we're going to get on the lower arm. Again, that is a small limitation with the rig, but it's such a small difference between one and the other that I really don't see that causing an animator any real issues. You'll notice that our twist has been calculated. That twist angle has been calculated based on the orientation of our FK bones. There's going to be an interesting approach taken later on for working out that angle based on some vector maths, although a different approach will be discussed in an overview type manner, though not shown or implemented in the DVD. So for those of you who maybe aren't so comfortable with your vector maths, we will discuss a more logical node-based approach that would give you the same results, or at least the same results for one of the more complicated parts of the vector maths there. So we do have FK and IK controls. I'm going to go ahead and reset these controls and zero them back out. Now you'll notice our lower arm doesn't consist of a single bone. It actually consists of 4 bones, 2 bones mimicking our ulna and 2 bones mimicking our radius. This is to provide a nice set of bones that can be used both for controlling our skeleton geometry, but also for where if we were to capture that goblin character to these bones, we'd have the ability to deform the goblin character's lower arm correctly. This will be discussed in fairly great detail when we come to it, as to why we need this setup and why we're designing this setup and the types of motion that we need for geometry in that area, how that geometry should deform, and why we need these 4 bones to enable that deformation. And this is really interesting. If we were to grab our wrist control and rotate our wrist control, you can see that the lower halves roll when we roll our wrist control, but the upper halves don't roll, and you'll also see that the entire bone acts as if it's one long bone in terms of position, and they do cross over when we roll our wrist. So just like the real ulnar and radius, these bones will mimic that motion and provide a very nice set of bones that we can either capture geometry to or parent geometry under, depending on the purpose. Now we're going to do something interesting with our wrist. We're going to work with both attached wrist control and detached wrist control. Now what that means is our attached wrist control currently, which we're working with, is parented underneath our lower arms. You see, when I rotate my arm around, my hand is maintaining orientation compared to the lower arm. However, the detached wrist control, if I blend over to the detached wrist control, that always exists in world space. That means that this control will always exist in world space, and if I rotate the arm, you'll see that a hand now maintains its world space orientation as opposed to following along in an FK-like manner. So that does give the animator the ability to work in either of these 2 ways. We're not just going to leave that there. We do have the ability, of course, to blend back and forth, but more than that, we also have the ability to match one to the other. Let me put these in more of a different kind of setup. So something like that, put some twist on, maybe lift the wrist up like so. And then we can see blending back and forth between these. They are indeed in very different locations, but we can go ahead and say this is our attached control, that's our detached control. Let's match our detached to the attach, and you'll see that those controls do indeed line up nicely. I'm going to undo that so that now they aren't lining up. Let's say match our attached to our detached, and you'll see that now those controls are lining up nicely. Now you may have noticed something interesting every time I grab the super wrist control, which is the name of our asset that's dealing with our wrist parameters, and that's that I'm getting a number of handles in the view. We've designed this control object so that if an animator was to come in and instead of grabbing any of the wrists, let's grab something else so we lose our handles for a second. Instead of grabbing either of the wrist controls, depending on which is visible, and our IK handle, we can also come in and grab the icon, the control object that sits and hovers above our wrist, and that grabs the super wrist control. They then come in and right click on the show handles tool and choose to see which handles they want. They could turn off the detached wrist if they wanted, the attached wrist if they want, and turn back on the detached wrist. They can also turn off the IK handles translation. The reason for this design of this control was to enable an animator who was working with inverse kinematics with IK on the arm, since if we blend over to IK, so let's hunt down that arm IK controls asset, blend over to IK. Let's also zero out our twist to make life a little bit easier, and grab our IK handle, and let's just move this back and over and up some as well. Fantastic. So you can see if you're working with IK as an animator, it could be very frustrating knowing that we're both positioning based on where we want our wrist to be and orienting based on where we want the wrist to be oriented, but we have to switch back and forth between two controls. And I didn't like that. I didn't like the fact that this could frustrate an animator, because when working in IK, you really are working just solely with the wrist position and orientation, and that pretty much drives the entire positioning of the arm with the exception of that twist control. So I devised and designed, and you'll see the design process, the thought process, and then, of course, you're going to see the complete creation of this control setup, what I am calling the super wrist control. And the super wrist control gives us access to that IK handle, as well as our orientation for the wrist, all in one control object without selecting between two different controls. And of course, if we wanted to, we could see the detached wrist. Of course, currently that is not having any effect, but we could blend over to that. You'll see the visibility of that wrist turns on. We now have the ability to come in here and say, that's my detached wrist. Let's position our wrist and also orient our wrist for our hand as well. So the super wrist control hopefully provides an animator with flexibility when working with the wrist and the hand and the arm in order to work with both position and orientation of the wrist at the same time, if indeed they wish to do that, and if indeed they're working with inverse kinematics. The final set of controls deal with the hand, and we're actually going to produce a layered set of controls from an overall control that gives us the ability to roll all our fingers, curl all our fingers up, as well as spread our fingers out and back in. From there, we're going to have the next level of control, which will give us the ability to move each finger individually in terms of rotations from the upper knuckle, as well as roll that finger as a whole, and that is on each finger individually. And then we're going to provide the highest level of control, if you will, or the finest level of control. That's going to be a series of just standard FK controls where we can come in. If I just grab this to make that update in the view, we can come in and grab each of these controls in turn and work with each bone individually. So we're going to have a layered set of controls. Once we have both the leg and arm controls all in place for the left hand side of our character, we're then going to go ahead and mirror those over to the right hand side of our character so that we have the rig for both the left and the right of our character complete. Now it's worth noting, let's point out the stretchiness on our arm as we did with our leg. If we turn down the arm stretchiness and then we're to come in and grab that shoulder control, you'll notice the arm indeed isn't stretching there, and we can blend over to our FK, and you'll see that if I was to come in and try and use our FK, if I was trying to stretch our upper FK stretch, our lower FK stretch, indeed that doesn't work. And you can see if I try and stretch IK, that doesn't work, and if I grab that end effector and was to move that end effector, that's not allowing that arm to stretch as well. So we are indeed restricting the stretchiness on our arm. So with that, that is going to conclude the introduction to this DVD. I really hope that everyone will benefit from this training product. And if you enjoy this training product, be sure to join us again in Character Rigging 2, where we will be implementing the central controls for our character, along with setting up the overall asset for our character. So with that, let's get started.